Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm a college counselor and have read applications for a small liberal arts college and 2 research universities. My twins are recent college graduates.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of 2 daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. Coming to you from the Big D, Dallas, Texas, where I'm going down memory lane. This was a really important city for me in my formative years. I lived here from age 23 to 31. And I've rarely been back since leaving. So everything I do is like taking me down memory lane. When I first got here, I said, hey, there's a Tom Thumb, which is where we used to do our grocery shopping. So, of course, I go in and buy some stuff just for old time's sake. And I'm staying right on 75 Central Highway, a few miles away from University Park, SMU campus. And yes, 75 is still just as congested as I remember it. We used to call it the parking lot back in the day. But Dallas has changed. I see so many more South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian families here than when I was here, and I love it. Special thanks to all of you who reached out to me and said, I've got a student on X campus, one of the 12 campuses I'm visiting on this trip, and they'd love to meet you on your visit. I love to meet students on these visits, and I like to ask them my 4 favorite questions, but when I actually have a meeting, I can really go a lot deeper and do a deep diver into the school. Special shout out to Melissa from New Jersey, who said her daughter found SMU based on what I said on one of the podcasts a few years ago. So I had a great meeting, 45-minute meeting with her daughter yesterday on SMU's campus. Special thanks to Kevin Newton, of course, one of our co-hosts who lives right around the corner. His wife just graduated from SMU Law. He treated me to some great Middle Eastern food at SMU yesterday, and it was just really surreal being back at SMU. I was a student here in the 90s at Dallas Seminary, and our library would close, and theirs was open till 2 a.m. So many a day I got kicked out of the library at 2 a.m. because it was closing, and I'm told it's open 24 hours now, but I've been on that campus hundreds of times, and so yesterday was just pretty cool, just being back and just taking a trip down memory lane, spending a few hours on the SMU campus. And I'll be back actually for 6 more hours from 9 to 3 on Monday, and then back one more time to have lunch with one of my students who's a senior here. So we'll definitely have to do a college spotlight on SMU after this trip. And I just couldn't be happier here. As soon as I send this podcast to Nemanja for production, I'm off to our Dallas reception to meet podcast listeners in the area. But let's share a few announcements and then get into today's episode. So if you live near Austin, Texas or Belton, Texas, we still have 2 more receptions. They're both from 6 to 7:30 p.m. The Austin event is on the 17th and the Belton event is on the 22nd. Just go to yourcollegebounkid.com events page, sign up, and make sure you list your questions, because the first thing I'm going to do at all these events is answer all the questions that you told me you want me to answer. By the way, when you're on our website, check out all of the bios. All the bios of all of our co-hosts and staffs are up. And, you might find it interesting to learn a little bit about the backgrounds of people you listen to every week. Don't forget our YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, goes out this week. And we're going to have a bunch of links to articles we think are very interesting, important articles in the world of admissions, the world of higher ed, that are not behind a paywall, that we were not able to discuss here on the podcast. So here's some of the articles that you'll get links to if you sign up for YCBK Plus for the April newsletter. One is called State Imposed Tuition Freezes Come with Unintended Consequences. And that talks about some of the negative aspects of when a college freezes or when a state freezes its tuition. There's another opinion piece on late decision. We talked about that a while ago, Bennington College having late decision, and it's called Admissions Innovation or Gimmick. And then there's an article on Wellesley College being the first official school to pass the $100,000 cost of attendance sticker price. There are several articles about how Trump is going after some of the most elite and wealthiest schools in the country because of their DEI initiatives. One article is called Trump Administration Suspends Dozens of Princeton University's Research Grants. Another one says about $1.8 billion in federal money for Cornell and Northwestern is frozen. An interesting article. You may remember Dartmouth was really one of the first schools to boldly come out and say they were going back to test mandatory admissions. So there's an article about how Dartmouth application dropped by 11% this year. They're down thousands and thousands of applications. There's another article called More Colleges Are Creating Homeless Liaison Roles. Here's why. In other words, homelessness has become such a problem with food insecurity and other financial struggles from students that they're literally creating positions within their school where someone's like the homeless liaison. There's an article on University of Michigan scrapping a multi-million-dollar DEI investment plan that they had. They were about to unleash and roll out, and they scrapped it at the last second. There's an article on Rosemont College in Pennsylvania and how it's combining with Villanova to become Villanova University at Rosemont. And then there's an article called Conservatives Seize the Moment to Remake Higher Education. Now, if you're a senior, I want to remind you that you have to read the fine print when it comes to health care coverage. I'll never forget a conversation I had with the financial aid officer at Davidson College. And she was telling me parents would just be screaming at her, yelling at her, because they never read the communication that says, if you have your own health insurance, we need proof by X date. And if not, we will charge your account for health insurance. And this is standard protocol. And I was talking to a student this week who said it's going to be $8,000 is what the school is going to charge her for her health insurance. So you don't want to end up double paying. So please look into this if you're graduating, you're about to go off to college, to make sure that your own current health coverage will extend to the college you're at. You might end up double paying. Now, our listeners are the best. In last week's episode, I said the state of New York really doesn't have one flagship, but there are really 4 university centers among the 63 SUNY schools, and those are Buffalo, Albany, Binghamton, and Stony Brook. Well, one of our astute New York listeners wrote in to say that was true until a few years ago, but Governor Hochul surprised a lot of residents by naming Buffalo and Stony Brook as the flagships moving forward, making them eligible for more state government funding than Binghamton or Albany. And I looked into this during the week and found out that this listener was spot on. In fact, here's a quote from an article I read. In her first State of the State address on January 5th, 2022, Governor Kathy Hochul announced the formal designation of Stony Brook University and the University at Buffalo as New York State's flagship universities as part of her plan for a new era for New York. Well, this did not land well at Binghamton, which is the most prestigious and the most selective of the 63 SUNYs. And here's a response from President Stegner at Binghamton. We're ranked higher than both Stony Brook and Buffalo because we have better student retention, better graduation rates, and better undergraduate teaching, said Stegner. Wow, he didn't bite his tongue. It is pretty rare for the flagship to not be the most selective public school in the state, but it does happen. Where I live in Georgia, Georgia Tech's a harder admit to get into than UGA, but UGA is the flagship for the state of Georgia. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to share 2 conversations I had at the SACAC conference with admission officers. And then I'm going to answer one question from a listener that came in twice from 2 different people. One was anonymous and one was from Alex. And both of these questions had to do with how a student can get their hands on the college-specific custom prompts before they're released on August 1st. All right, so let's dive in. So I said on Thursday's episode that I was going to share these two conversations I had at the SACAC conference, and I said one school I can name and one I can't name. So let's start out with the one that I can't name. So I bumped into someone at the SACAC conference that we are scheduled to have an interview with. And you're not going to be able to guess who it is because this was not one of the interviews that I announced in the past when I mentioned a bunch of interviews in 2025. So racking your brain trying to figure out who I'm talking about is going to be futile. But we're in the planning phases of this interview. And there were, we were into like going over a question set, and we had some diversity related questions on our outline for the interview. So I went up to this admissions leader, and I was really happy to see him there. And we're talking for almost 20 minutes, actually. And then he says to me, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do the interview anymore, which kind of surprised me. And then he said, my boss is extremely nervous and doesn't think we should do it anymore. And he went on to say that we're one of the schools that got the Dear Colleague letter on February 14th. Now, in higher ed circles, sometimes they're just calling this the DCL, the Dear Colleague letter. And there was a lot of buzz about the Dear Colleague letter at the SACAC conference. So I thought I would just talk to you a little bit about what is the Dear Colleague letter that this admission professional is referring to. What is it that's creating all this buzz? So Forbes did a really great overview of the letter. So I'm going to read to you what Forbes said. On February 14, 2025, the U.S. Department of Education issued a controversial Dear Colleague letter to colleges and universities across the nation. The letter, ostensibly aimed at ensuring compliance with federal anti-discrimination laws, has sparked widespread criticism for its perceived overreach, vague language, and potential to upend long-standing practices in hiring, promotion, compensation, discipline, and student housing. Critics argue that the letter not only misinterprets the Supreme Court's rulings, but attempts to impose ideological mandates on institutions of higher learning. What's in the letter, which some in higher ed are calling the DCL, Dear Colleague letter? The letter outlines a series of directives that colleges must follow to remain eligible for federal funding. Among its most contentious provisions are hiring promotion. The letter suggests institutions must adopt race-neutral criteria in hiring and promotion, even in cases where diversity initiatives have historically been used to address systemic inequities. Compensation. It applies that compensation practices must be scrutinized to ensure no disparate impact on protected groups. Discipline. The letter warns against disciplinary policies that could disproportionately affect certain groups, potentially undermining campus safety and accountability. Housing. It calls for housing policies to be reevaluated to avoid any perceived discrimination, even in cases where single-sex housing has been used to protect student privacy and safety. The letter appears to contradict policies allowed under the Supreme Court landmark decision, Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard 2023, which upheld race-neutral admissions practices but did not mandate the wholesale elimination of diversity considerations in other areas of campus life. Now, this has really created, 5-alarm fire, if that's what you want to call it, or 8, 9, 10 on the Richter scale earthquake within the higher ed community. The response has been swift and critical. Prominent university presidents, legal scholars, advocacy groups have denounced the letter as an overreach that threatens institutional autonomy. Critics have called the letter unnecessarily prescriptive and warned it could stifle innovation and diversity efforts on campus. The National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Ed expressed concern the letter's vague language could lead to confusion and costly litigation. Some institutions, particularly those with robust legal teams, have indicated they will continue their current practice until specific guidance is provided. Others, however, fear the loss of federal funding, are scrambling to interpret the letter's directives. By the way, I want to recommend an outstanding podcast. It came out on Tuesday of this last week, and it is on the podcast The Daily, which is a New York Times podcast. And it's an interview with Princeton's president and how he is aggressively fighting back against the attempts to stifle their individual autonomy as an institution. So most people are cowering just because of the loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. But Princeton's president has said academic freedom, academic integrity is at stake, and we can't give that up. It's a really interesting listen. I want to recommend it. He also wrote a really good article in The Atlantic, too, if you want to read a fantastic article he wrote. So that's what's going on with the Dear Colleague letter. Legal experts are really divided on the letter's enforceability. Some think it lacks the force of law and it's not subject to the formal rulemaking process. Others, however, warn that the Department of Education could use the letter as a basis for investigations or funding cuts, even if its directives are ultimately struck down in court. So, it's worth following this. It's a huge controversy right now that's going on in higher ed. So that was one interesting conversation, that I had at the SACAC conference in Atlanta. 1,000 of us there, half admission officers, half college counselors, or close to that. Now I want to switch to another conversation I had, and this time I can name names. And this time I'm talking to an admission officer from Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, which is not too far from Cincinnati. And I say to the rep, I didn't realize how selective you'd become for business. And I share a story about a student I work with this year from Cincinnati who got into Ohio State's direct admit program for business, but didn't get into Miami University. So the rep says to me, can I ask you a question? Did the student visit our campus? And she went on to say, we are all about demonstrated interest, and I do not mind telling you that. If you don't visit and you're from Ohio, it's going to be rough sailing for you. And it just got me to thinking. So Miami University is a public university. Very few public universities offer ED. And here's why. Most public schools feel like every single member of our state is paying for our institution through their tax dollars. But early decision is an admission pathway that favors well-resourced families who don't need to look to see what every college is asking them to pay to see what type of scholarship money they got from all the schools, and then make a decision with finances being a part of it. It favors people that are in a financial state that they don't have to do that. So most colleges, public colleges across the country don't have ED. I mean, when you think about it, the whole University of California system, Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, Michigan, Wisconsin, I could go on and on and on, all the different schools, from Maryland to UMass Amherst, and all these schools, they don't have early decision. However, and you might have heard me talk about this with Andy Strickler a few times. There's no doubt in our minds. It is coming, and it's coming fast into the public sphere. And I think there's plenty of evidence of that because, like, in 2018, UVA didn't have early decision, but then they offered it in 2019, becoming the first flagship to go to it. It was very controversial at the time. Washington Post read an article, had front page article on it. Last year, Vermont went to early decision. UConn has added early decision. And some schools are even adding it as early as October 15th. College of Charleston now has early decision. Coastal Carolina has early decision. And then the College of New Jersey, a public liberal arts college in Ewing, which is just outside of Princeton, they have early decision. And even one of the SUNYs, SUNY Geneseo, I always meant to say that wrong, by the way, they have early decision. So I feel like the dam is about to break. And the interesting thing is not everybody looks at early decision the same way. Now, Virginia for a long time has been the leader when it comes to public schools having early decision. Christopher Newport has it. Mary Washington has it. I mentioned UVA has it. William and Mary is the only public school in the country with 2 rounds of ED, an ED1 and an ED2. And when I visited William and Mary on December 5th, they made it very clear how much they like early decision. And it was a significant thumb on the scale, the people that apply early decision. Whereas UVA, I was interviewing Greg Roberts right at the time when UVA went back to early decision. He made it very clear they were not going to be admitting students in ED, that they were not going to admit regular. It was just a way of making sure they don't over-enroll because they had over-enrolled the year before. giving peace of mind to some families even earlier to know that they were in part of their enrollment management. On my recent visit there on December 6th, they made it clear that it's a slight advantage, but it's not like what you see with the private schools. So the interesting thing is more and more colleges, public colleges, are adding ED, but they don't all look at it the same. You have places like Miami University and College of William and Mary where it feels very much like some of the private schools that are so clear in their language, like a place like an American University or a Lehigh, just so many that I could mention, that it's such an extra thumb on the scale to apply ED. And then you have others like UVA where it's an incremental difference, but it's not substantial. But just keep an eye on this space because a lot is changing. And as it gets more and more competitive for students, I'm expecting to see more and more and more public colleges come on this list because after a while, the dam breaks. And, and when people can see how effective it is and allowing you to lock kids in and lower your admit rate, help with your budget, get some of the top kids you want, I think the stigma of public schools and early decision is going to fade away. Now, Virginia Tech should be noted. They went the opposite direction. They had early decision and came out with a bold pronouncement that felt it's not equitable for people that are not highly resourced. So they got rid of it about a year and a half ago. So a lot of topsy-turvy, a lot of movement in this space. But to me, all the momentum is toward ED. And even on the private side, like look at all the schools that never had ED2 and now have ED2. I mean, Carnegie Mellon didn't have ED2. They have ED2. Rice never had ED2. They have ED2. Boston College, and we could go on and on. More and more schools are adding that second round on the private side. If you look at early decision, approximately 200 schools offer it, and about 100 of those have 2 rounds. But most of the ones that don't have 2 rounds, it's not because they wouldn't want to have 2 rounds. It's just that they may not have enough demand. They might only get like 7 apps or 17 apps. It's not enough to have a whole second round. Only 12 schools that are very selective that only have 1 round. All the Ivies, Amherst, Williams, Northwestern, Duke, right? All the other schools that used to only have 1 round have gone to 2 rounds unless they're a school that just doesn't get that many ED apps. So just interesting to keep an eye on what's happening in that space. All right, let's transition to our question from a listener. I'll play the questions from both listeners and then I'll answer them.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for your podcast. I'm curious if you could address the question that you said you might be able to address a couple of episodes ago about how you advise students to find supplements before the Common App rolls over on August 1st. What are the methods that you use to actually extract those supplements before they're actually officially made available on the Common App? Would love to know. Thanks so much for your help and for your podcast.
Hey, Mark, this is Alex, a longtime listener. I've sent in other questions. I'm just calling in to say that a segment on how to get the custom prompts early would be fantastic. This is not relevant to me yet. My child is younger, but I have several friends who've talked about, wow, I really wish I could help my child get started on this, earlier over the summer. And I think it would be a big hit. So just wanted to weigh in to say, I think that segment on ways that kids can get those custom prompts before August 1st would be amazing. Thanks again for everything you guys do.
So first of all, if you heard me talk about what are the time-consuming parts of the college admission process, which I did a few weeks ago, there's nothing that I emphasized more than the research that you put in to figuring out which colleges you're going to apply to, especially if I count visits as part of the research, which they really are, right? They can be their own category, but you could see them as extension of research. And these college-specific custom prompts. That's what takes so long. And the problem is the Common App doesn't come out until August 1. I have students I work with that are back in school the first week of August. So this is what's creating this stress. You're already in school, you're in a demanding curriculum, and now you have these prompts that are very hard to answer. Sometimes the hardest ones are these 150 worders. For example, UPenn's got killer 150 worder. These are hard. They take so much research and so much effort and so much time to do them well. So if there's a way you can get this information early, it's going to really reduce your stress. So I'm going to share with you what I do with my students to help in this regard. It's not foolproof, but it does work more than half the time. First of all, shout out to Karen Christoph, Assistant VP and Dean of Admissions at Colorado College. I've interviewed her twice on this podcast. She helped inform my thinking a little bit on this. She's the one who shared with me that Common App asked us to have any change by April turned in that we're making from last year's prompts. But she said, so many people in higher ed don't do it by April. They're not going to really kick you out of the Common App, right? But everybody does it by June. And so I was just asking her, when can I have my students reach out and try to get these prompts? And everybody will have already definitively made their decision. And we agreed, like after July 4th, game on. Everybody's made a decision by then. So the question is, how do you get it? Well, the first source, and this is the easiest source, is a website. It's internationalcollegecounselors.com. internationalcollegecounselors.com. Just go to essays, and then under the essays tab, you'll see essays prompts. Now, I'm going to have more to say about this website next week. I'm going to share a new thing I've just started incorporating into my counseling. I literally just shared it with the first few students. I'm very excited about it. So I'm going to come back to this website next week and talk to you a little bit more about a brand new idea that I'm using. I'm excited about. But for now, this website's really helpful. Now, the one thing you do need to realize is you're not going to see it right now. It's April. Okay, we're still in 2025 mode. I don't expect you to see it in May, but certainly in June you will. Last year, I used this website a lot with my students in June, and they start to come in. They start trickling in because they're just out researching them and putting them up when they see them. And I found them to be very reliable. There was not one single time I found where they put the prompt up and it was not accurate. So that's the first source. Just go to internationalcollegecounselors.com and, go there in June and you'll start to see them trickle in. Now, another thing you can do is if the colleges you're interested in have admissions blogs, you should be using them anyway to learn more about the schools. But they tend to put them in their admissions blogs. UVA had theirs out by mid-June last year in their admissions blogs. UGA had theirs out in late May, what the prompts would be. So be researching admissions blogs for any schools of interest. That's another great source. Also, there's social media. They tend to put it out on their social media, so you should be plugged into the social media. If you're on their mailing list, which you should be, oftentimes, you'll get an email blast, and then the website, they'll just put up on the website you have to be checking under the how to apply. A lot of times schools will put that out before the August 1st date on their website. So if none of those methods work, then you want to just ask. Now, if you're asking in person, let's say you're at a college fair, I prefer like a two-tiered approach to asking. So the first question is this. Well, let me talk about how to frame it. And you can do this in an email or you can do it in person. But you start out by saying, hey, my name is Ruby. I'm a rising senior at New York Central, and I'm definitely interested in your school. I'll be really slammed in the fall. Really busy, and I'd love to start working on your college-specific custom prompts. And I'd like to know if they've stayed the same from last year. Now, the reason why I like to ask that first is this is my experience. People are very comfortable telling you whether they've stayed the same from last year or not. If you go back and look at my interview with Christina Lopez, the Dean of Admission at Barnard College, I literally asked her that right in the interview. And she's like, yeah, they're the same. They haven't changed. And that was pretty early in the year. That might even have been May when I did that interview. So I find people are very comfortable telling you if they've stayed the same from last year. Once again, you're going to be safest asking this question, certainly July 5th. But if you even ask it mid-June, most of the time they're going to know. So that's the first question to ask. Have they stayed the same? And this works better if you're having a conversation with somebody. If it's an email, you can't just, hey, have they stayed the same? Wait for the response, send them another one. You can't do it that way. Right now, you're being a nuisance. So it's a two-part question. So have they stayed the same by email? And if not, can you please let me know what they are so that I can get working on them, because I'm really going to be slammed in the fall and I'm definitely applying to your school, and you can even throw in, I just love the combination of whatever it is your reason, right? I love how you combine like creative writing with hands-on opportunities to work with whatever your reason is. Keep it short, sweet, simple. And my experience is that more than 50% of people get an answer to this. So now I do need to be honest with you. Sometimes when people do this, they get a response that says, we released them on August 1st. Check then. Some people just have a policy of not sharing them. But I find that's less than half because, in my opinion, that's crazy. It's too competitive out there. If you've got somebody that wants to start working on your application now, do you want them to go work on your competitor or work on yours? So the bottom line is, if all those other sources I shared with you don't work, then just send a letter in, send an email. When I say letter, I mean an email. And who should you send it to? You should send it to the territory manager, the regional admission officer. How do you get that? Just Google name of college, meet the admission staff, and the majority of the time it will take you to a listing of admission officers. And sometimes their photos, phone numbers, and everything are there. But most of the time, their names and emails and territories are there. And you want to send it to the person assigned to your territory. Now, there are some schools that don't assign territories that way. Princeton comes to mind, and there's many others as well. You can just send that into the general admissions email address as well. Like a lot of times colleges will rotate, who answers that amongst their staff, or the administrative assistant will ferret that out to certain people to answer it. So that's what you want to do. And this is something I've been doing for years with my students. And the success rate is definitely above 50%. And it allows students, even if you get it a month early, like just to be able to have July to really crank these things out and get most of the work done, it will reduce your stress. And so that's my tip. Hopefully this was helpful, Alex, an anonymous listener. And remember to request your book from Princeton Review. We have 4 books. And if you want the best 390 colleges, if you want the digital SAT book, if you want essays that kick apps, or you just want their overall admission book, just send an email to marketschoolmatchforyou.com, put your name, address, and the episode you're on, and I'll get that off to the Princeton Review contact. And they're cranking them out like pretty much within 24 to 48 hours, because I always get a confirmation every time when the book has been mailed. All right, we'll now transition to part 2 of Lisa's excellent interview with Rebecca Winthrop and Jenny Anderson, authors of the book, The Disengaged Teen.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part 2 of Lisa's interview with Jenny and Rebecca, Lisa, Jenny, and Rebecca continue to talk about the price we are paying as a society for the perfectionism at all costs mentality. Rebecca talks about the idea of productive struggle. Rebecca shares a story of a Yale student who didn't handle struggle very well. Jenny and Rebecca talk about what to do and what not to do if you have a kid who is stuck in passenger mode. Rebecca talks about what you can do to develop explorer muscles. And Jenny talks about the concept of tutoring to optimize. Listen and enjoy.
But you can encourage small risks. So again, in my daughter's instance, she was considering a course load. She wanted to take sort of, in the system that we're in, 10 very, very rigorous subjects. And I said, how about 9? And on that 10th, let's take an easy one. And it was counter to everything she believed, but I held firm. And I realized that might diminish her chances a little bit, but it also increases her chances of getting through intact. And that is, I do not want the system to break her. So I am being the guardian between her and the system, recognizing, and by the way, her sister needs something completely different. So that's, what I mean? I think that's, so the unhappy achiever, it's the fragility is really what you're seeing. And you were just helping them at all cost to develop that self-awareness of when it's getting too much, of the narrative of I must always succeed, and really conveying the importance of sort of balance, self-care, community, be with your friends, be with your family, have a conversation with your grandmother, do something that is not about an outcome. Do something that's like really kind of restorative.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And it is very, counterintuitive to how I think a lot of people are sort of feeling like we have to parent our high schoolers right now. But it is like if you have perfection at any cost, then you're not making mistakes. And then we all know that mistakes are vital to learning, right?
Absolutely.
That is how we learn the best. So if you're learning a foreign language, if you make a mistake and then you correct yourself, that's what you'll remember, that word or that grammatical idea. So it really is preventing that from doing that,
Yeah.
which I think is a huge problem with the educational system as it's currently configured.
Absolutely. I would say the SAT, to me, this doesn't exist in the UK where I live. The SAT, the fact that you can take it multiple times and go with your best score. I mean, there's plenty of issues, we could debate the SAT until the cows come home, but like the idea that you can improve and that you only have to send your best score, to me is like, it is a high stakes standardized test. There are plenty of problems with that, but it is a good message to kids. If you invest in improving on this, that's what you show up. That is not the case in many countries where like you get to take a bunch of tests on a particular day and those are your scores. Yes. And so with that idea of improvement, iteration, not high stakes in a less high stakes setting, to me is just a great example of how we convey that the goal is progress and practice and iteration and not the outcome at all costs.
The other thing, Lisa, that I would add, because this question we get a lot around the balance between happy achiever and unhappy achiever. And we can do a lot at home in our modeling of how we talk about our work, how we voice over our own mistakes. So I will talk about, I had a big presentation. Which is totally true. This happened recently. I totally made I totally messed up my slides. The font went all wacko. I was so embarrassed. But next time I'm going to double check, not just on my computer, but on the projector of the auditorium. And so the more we voiceover, we all mess up here and there. And this idea of productive struggle is really what unhappy achievers are missing. And it's really essential that they have that in the workplace and when they get to college, because no one is there to tell them exactly how to do it right. So that is really important for us as parents. And second, what Jenny talked about is this idea of modeling that they matter no matter their performance. And that, when she said, do something that's restorative, it's not just the restorative for their sort of energy to study more later. It's you matter, I love you, you're an important person, you have contributions for the world. Even if you got a C, I would still love you. Because a lot of times these kids conflate their performance with their identity and their self-worth. And we have this incredible story in the book of this character, Amina, who was a happy achiever. She was a go-getter. She did everything perfectly and got into, I think it was 8 Ivy League schools. And when she got to the school she went to, Yale, she hit a stumbling block. School was a little hard. She didn't get into a club she wanted to get into that was selective. And she was like, wait, what? But I'm the smart one. If I struggle, that means I'm not a good student. I'm not smart. If I ask for help, that means I'm a failure. Like, she had these things in her mind, and she almost dropped out. She didn't. She took a leave of absence, but it really shook her to the core. And that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like that exploring and making mistakes also builds resilience.
100%.
Which is crucial to, I feel like, staying alive at this point.
Yes.
And being able to function at all. So passenger kids, how do we help? Because I feel like I definitely, my oldest was definitely a passenger kid. She'll get engaged in what she likes, and if she doesn't like it, it's going to be just the bare minimum of what she has to do to get by. How could I have approached that with her differently?
Well, interest is that's the key. I mean, we would say probably the key thing. So there's one thing not to do and one thing to do, but let's focus on the to do. Lean into the interests that they do have, because that is where they will generate their spark and their motivation and start to build those kind of learning to learn skills and start to feel successful in something, which can spill over. It doesn't always. but there is evidence that it does spill over. And so I think there's sometimes a tendency, you're not doing well in school, you're not putting enough in, I'm going to take that stuff away from you because it's distracting you. Like, but then they've got literally nothing to go on, right? And so it's a hard balance because you don't want to reward, sort of the passenger behavior. But I think if we don't lean into their interests and find the spark and develop the spark and create that sort of virtuous cycle of I'm doing something, I'm digging in, I'm learning more, I'm getting better, I want to do more. Oh, wait, I am a capable, competent person in this realm. I can turn up in other realms where I feel less successful and less capable or less interested and have it pay off. I think another thing we can do is really try to be the bridge between what they're doing in school and what is happening in the world. So, I mean, it is overwhelming how much kids feel that what they're learning in school is not relevant to what they're being prepared for. And oftentimes it is, and it's just a bridging exercise. So, an example sometimes I use is King Lear, right? Like, oh, who wants to read another dead white guy? It's so boring. Like, can't understand anything he's saying. Like, this play is so stupid. And it's like, hey, you love Succession. Succession is about like deeply dysfunctional families that are stabbing each other in the back. Like, this is the exact same idea. Let's look for some of the similarities. Like, you read, Act 1, Scene 4, and then we're going to watch, and by the way, you can like chat GPT that and figure out what happens in Act 1, Scene 4. and then be like, hey, that's just like the fight that, Roy is having with his kids or whatever. Like, you know what I mean? I think and that both reinforces that you're learning in school is very important and, kind of validating their experience of putting a lot of energy into something that doesn't feel great. And it is being the bridge.
The other thing to keep in mind for all parents who have kids who are in passenger mode, a lot of the time or all of the time, is the thing that we actually worry about is when kids get really stuck in passenger mode and they can't break out into explorer mode. And it becomes this identity of, I'm not going to try. It's not cool. They're not really deeply investing in their learning because they will not develop the competencies that they need to thrive in this brave new world we're in with generative AI. They will not be leading with AI. AI will be leading and doing to them. So that's what we care about most if they get really stuck. But it's okay to sometimes be in passenger mode. And I'm sometimes in passenger mode. I've said on many occasions to the, chagrin of my finance department that I hate my budget meetings because I find budgets boring. Like, I'm just going to say it. Like, I just do. But they're really important. I know, like, the strategic questions I have to focus on, and I really rely on my finance managers to do all the detailed work. So we all are in passenger mode occasionally. You cannot be in explorer mode 100% of the time. So I think that if your daughter was really into some classes, that's great. And to remember that so that she's exploring in some classes, but maybe in passenger and others, we can help them try to maybe be in a little more explorer mode in classes they don't seem engaged in. Or if there's kids who are really it's become an identity, they're stuck across the board, is start talking much more about the content of their classes rather than how they did or how they went over at the dinner table. And you don't need to talk about every class. You can talk about one and go deep. The other thing that we can do is remember that kids can explore muscles anywhere. It can be in a classroom, but it could be in extracurriculars. It could be on a home improvement project. It can be outside of school that they can build those resilient learning muscles that they're going to need.
Yeah, no. And it's interesting. She just graduated from college, but one class that just captivated her so much was a cinematography class on who killed JFK. And so they analyzed all these films from different angles, and talked about, and the professor would never give his opinion, which drove the class insane. But like, maybe we've had so many conversations in our house about that topic. And she was engaged, like she typically wasn't,
Right.
but like her work for that class was excellent. And and I have a lot of kids that I work with as a college counselor, like, if they have a great teacher or there's something,
Yep.
they'll show up and you will see all this development. And then they go to physics class and you don't see that. But it's true that school, like the way we do school, you have to be good at everything.
I know.
And I mean, I know, like, I am not good at everything. I always joke that, Mark in our business does all the money because I can't add. My math skills are just terrible, but I listen really well. Give me some feelings, writing, but I don't have to be good at everything. So I don't know why we expect kids to do that either.
I wrote a piece in 2006 for the New York Times about the shift from tutoring for your weakness. So, you're struggling in math, you get a tutor, to tutoring for optimizing. So you have a B, you could get to an A. And that it had gone from your one weak subject to every subject. So this is clearly for a particular demographic of children, but that idea of must be good at everything and must find ways to get good at everything had really, really taken hold. And that I remember talking to a lot of tutors and counselors who had been doing that work for such a long time. And they said, it's a real shift, this idea of fixing what needs fixing and filling in the Swiss cheese holes, which is very natural in learning, right? We all struggle with something at some time and trying to figure that out so we don't fall too far behind, versus trying to be excellent at everything, which is just exhausting.
I would advise parents who are listening, if they have kids who are prone to passenger mode, and I have one of these children, to really talk about the thing that they're most excited about first. Because usually when they come home at the end of the day, usually when kids come home and we're like, oh my gosh, they're going to bomb their math test, we are focused on math or the things that they struggle with. And if you think about it, the least favorite part of your day at work, if you come home and have to rehash like your most unfavorite meeting that you really despise, you're not going to get a great fun feeling about school. And that, so start with the classes they love, start with the JFK documentary. And that just gives a funner feeling about school. And then secondarily, there may be a few classes. I don't think this is great across the board, but a few classes where you say, look, go ahead and coast along, but don't foreclose your opportunities. Do enough work if you really find it lethally boring or whatever, and you've got a lot of other stuff going on and you need to allocate your energy. Coast along, but don't do so little that you don't master some of the core material and you can't take the follow-on class next year, or you get a really, really bad grade that forecloses your opportunities. Right. But, hey, if you're coasting along, getting a B, great. And you're spending your other energy really developing your explorer muscles elsewhere, then you're probably good to go and parents can relax.
Friends, this concludes part 2 of Lisa's interview with Jenny and Rebecca. We hope you join us next week for part 3 of 4. On Thursday's episode, Vince joins me to discuss trends he's seen out there as admissions decisions are released. Susan and I take some time to unpack a question from an anonymous listener who has several questions about engineering programs. And we'll continue with part 2 of 3 of my debate with David Blowbaum, co-founder of Summit Prep, on whether elite schools should make the ACT or the SAT mandatory, part 2 of 3. And for our college spotlight, it's also part 2 of 3 with VP of Enrollment at Swarthmore College and Swarthmore alum Jim Bach. And Jim is helping us to understand Swarthmore College. And friends, it's decision time. National Candidate Reply Day, Decision Day, 2 weeks away. Remember, friends, college is not a prize to be won. College is a match to be made. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs.
and our international admissions expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.